Hey, welcome to part 2 of my BMW engine rebuild. If you haven't seen the first part yet, I highly encourage you to check it out. You will find out how we got to this stage and what we did earlier. In this part, we will focus mainly on cleaning the entire intake system, including the throttle body, the EGR valve, and the intake manifold. We will replace the burned-out glow plugs, install a new oil separator, and also do a few other things that are really worth seeing. Now I will focus on the next steps of the work. I place the previously cleaned injectors next to their slots and carefully install the injector holders in the correct orientation. They should be facing upward, just like in the picture. Then I gently slide all the injectors into place, making sure they seat properly into the copper sealing washers we installed earlier. The only thing you really need to watch out for is not hitting the injector tip against the edge of the slot. We definitely don't want any damage or bending, since these are delicate and expensive components. After this step, the whole assembly is already looking neat. We're getting very close to finishing the reassembly. I start by hand threading all the injector stud nuts, 12 pieces, size 8 or 10 depending on your engine version. Then I tighten them symmetrically with a torque wrench at 7 nanometers. If you're holding a mouse right now, you can show your appreciation for my work by leaving a like under this video, and I'll be very grateful for it. Finally, I check if everything is firmly in place. In this case, everything looks good. If any injector feels loose, it most likely means you installed the injector holder the wrong way around, and it didn't press the injector down properly. Next, I reinstall the fuel lines in their exact original positions. In the previous video, I mentioned setting them aside in the correct order, and now we're putting them back the same way. This step is very important, as it greatly reduces the risk of fuel leaks, especially since we're reusing these lines without adding new seals. I tighten all the nuts with a 17 mm open-end wrench to 30 nanometers, without using any grease, paste, or engine oil. Everything should be dry. Next, I reconnect all the injector electrical plugs, making sure they are attached in the correct order. If you didn't disassemble the rail itself, everything will automatically line up properly. After that, I secure the 3 screws to the housing, located here. You'll need a size 5 socket, and according to service data, they should be tightened to 6 nanometers. After that, I reconnect the plugs for the mass airflow sensor and the camshaft position sensor, making sure the clips snap securely into place. Now, on the side of the engine, we still have one small issue to fix. Earlier, I noticed that one of the vacuum hoses was damaged, so I'll remove it and replace it with a new one. You can see the part number on the screen. I paid just under $10 for it. Staying on the right side of the car, it's finally time for the moment I've been waiting for. The glow plug replacement. I'm really curious to see the condition of my old plugs. I remove all 6 connectors, being careful not to mix up the order in which they need to be reinstalled. It's not too difficult, but just in case, I've marked the exact locations of each plug on the screen. To make my job easier, I spray the threads with WD-40 and give it about 3 minutes to take effect. After a short break, I use a deep socket size 10. Also known as a spark plug socket, to remove all the glow plugs. I make sure not to turn them at an angle, since that could damage the threads. In most cases, you shouldn't have any problems unscrewing them, but if one is stuck, use a stronger penetrating agent to loosen it. Now I can compare the old worn-out and heavily burned tips with the new glow plugs, exactly the same type, but clean and ready for installation. Quite a difference, right? This is exactly why I wanted to replace them. Over time, you'll feel that the car doesn't run as smoothly as it should, and very often this is the reason. First, before replacing the plugs, I clean the threads and the surrounding area using a carbon deposit cleaner, being very careful not to let anything fall inside. Once everything is clean, I insert all 6 glow plugs into their slots and tighten them gently by hand with the socket without applying any force. My goal here is to seat them lightly and safely. In the second step, I use a torque wrench set to 15 Newton meters. And just like that, the glow plug replacement is done and will last for many thousands of kilometers. Now I'm moving on to one of the final but also very important components, the intake manifold. This is how the manifold looks, full of deposits that have been collecting here for many years. I remove all the gaskets, which already look relatively new, and clean every corner of the manifold using a dedicated intake cleaner to remove the carbon buildup. In the original cars, this part came with very faulty swirl flaps that must be removed before they damage the engine. In my case, someone had already removed them, so I just make sure the blanks are properly sealed. After cleaning, I reinstall everything back in place. If your gaskets are old, damaged, leaking, or if you don't have the swirl flaps properly blanked off, make sure to take care of these issues. The complete repair kit, with part numbers shown on the screen, costs around $25. In addition, in the earlier stage, we removed the throttle body and the EGR valve, which I also restore to their former condition using the exact same cleaning process. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut here. If we want fully functional components without spending too much money, we need to take the time and carefully clean out every corner. In really tough cases, you can use power tools. Just be careful not to scratch the surfaces where the gaskets will sit. Here you can see the before and after effect in my case, and I'm personally very satisfied with the results. The final step of cleaning, once we know the buildup won't interfere with proper operation, is checking the valve's tightness. I take a large syringe and connect it to the vacuum hose port. When you pull air, the plunger inside should retract and drop. That's the first test, confirming that it's moving freely. The second check is maintaining steady vacuum and making sure it doesn't drop on its own. If you don't move the syringe, the plunger should stay in place, which confirms that the internal membrane is sealed. If the plunger slowly drops by itself, it may indicate a hole in the membrane, meaning the part is no longer airtight and will need to be replaced. In my case, everything looks fine, so I can continue with reassembly. And once again, to make sure everything works properly, I clean the surface where the intake manifold gaskets connect to the engine block. This is how it looked before installing the part, and this is how it looks after cleaning off all the excess dirt and oil. Big difference, right? For the best results, I coat the intake manifold gaskets with a small amount of fresh engine oil, just like we did earlier with other rubber seals. When everything is ready, I place the whole part back in position, making sure each bolt sits correctly. While everything is still a bit loose, I reconnect all the electrical plugs we unplugged earlier on the right rear side, also remembering about the vacuum line hidden behind the cover, which we replaced with a new one. Doing this before tightening the manifold completely gives us a bit more room to work, and if something doesn't want to click into place, we can shift it slightly and reach the tricky spot without any major issues. After that, as always, I tighten all the bolts evenly and gently without using force. Along the line of the channels, you'll need a size 10 socket, and deeper inside the manifold, you'll need size 11. I strongly advise against doing this by feel. These parts are quite delicate, and even using a proper torque wrench, one of my bolts still snapped. I had to spend an extra $10, wait a few days for the replacement to arrive, and then disassemble and reassemble everything again. If everything is now correctly seated in its place, you can tighten the oil dipstick tube on the side of the cover, and once it's secured, you can move on to installing our clean and shiny throttle body. On the edge, there is a gasket that I remove with the help of my sharp little pick. I lightly coat the groove with fresh engine oil to ensure the best possible seal, then install a new original gasket, which cost me $3, and also give it a light coat of oil after fitting. At the intake channel to the manifold, there is another gasket that isn't visible at first glance because it's so dirty. In my case, this one wasn't sealing properly, as all the parts around it were covered in carbon buildup. I remove it as well. You can clearly see the color difference. 21 years have taken their toll. The new gasket cost another $3. I cleaned the area thoroughly, removing all deposits both on the surface and deep inside the gasket grooves. If you're doing this too, just be careful not to break them with an oversized screwdriver. Once everything is prepared, I place the freshly oiled gasket back in its place and reinstall the EGR valve, which we had already cleaned in the earlier stage. I thread all the bolts by hand as far as I can and then tighten them with a size 5 Allen key to 10 Newton meters. After evenly securing all 4 bolts, I fasten the clamp with a worm drive screw on the connection to the EGR cooler, using a size 7 socket. To make things a little easier in the next step, I create some extra space at the front for mounting the throttle body by gently moving the intake duct aside and placing it in position. I hand tighten what I can and then finish with the torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters. Earlier during disassembly, I mentioned the importance of having the right extension length, and I had to get a bit creative myself, taping a few parts together as you can see in the video. But in the end, what matters most is that everything works properly. Once everything is firmly secured, you can slide the intake duct back into place, lock the clamp, reconnect the EGR valve electrical plug, and attach the vacuum hose back into the system. I now move to the other side of the car and carefully remove the protective foil covering the turbocharger inlet. Gently, I fit the end of the pipe back into position, rotate the clamp until it locks, and tighten the single mounting screw that secures the part in place. Next, I clean the area where the air filter will sit, making sure the housing is in good condition and won't contaminate the new white filter. I chose a high-quality replacement filter at a low price, just $20, and trusted it because it had hundreds of positive reviews from other owners of this engine. In my opinion, in cases like this, there's no need to overspend, since it's an easily accessible, replaceable part. After installing the filter, I briefly remove the 3 screws holding the injector connectors so I can replace the oil separator. To be safe, I place a cloth over the filter to ensure nothing falls onto it and dirties the rest of the system. I unscrew the 4 bolts securing the separator using a Torx 27-bit. After removing the fasteners, I take the part out and set it aside, while also vacuuming the entire area to remove any dirt and debris that has collected in the corners over time. Once cleaned, the space looks much better. It's worth doing this now because many people don't realize how important this part is. Without regular replacement, the car may start producing white smoke, which we definitely want to avoid. Here you can see the old separator compared to the new one I bought for just $10. Once again, it's a high-quality replacement part, which I'll install together with 2 very important seals. First, I pull out the core by gently pulling it toward me. It's not locked in any way. Then I remove the middle gasket, which conveniently comes out with the old element, making the process easier. I previously lubricated all the new rubber parts with a light coat of fresh engine oil. Now, I place the smaller gasket into its seat, making sure it fits properly, and then install the new separator in its correct position. It only fits one way, so there's no risk of making a mistake here. Now I return to the car and remove the old gaskets seated in the valve cover. Each of them has a unique shape, so fitting the new ones is straightforward. There's only one correct orientation for each. To press the gaskets into place, I use a plastic stick. Due to the sharp edges, I never use metal tools for this step. Once that's done, I place the separator back in its position and tighten it evenly and gently, and then finish with the torque wrench set to 10 Newton meters. Finally, I secure the injector wiring rail, which I had moved earlier for better access. I promise this will be the last time we touch it in this video. Next, I remove the protective cloth and install the plastic cover of the air filter housing. This part can only be positioned correctly after removing the oil cap. Once you've aligned it properly, reinstall the cap to avoid any unwanted surprises inside, and then tighten them with a size 5 Allen bit to 8 Newton meters. On some engine versions, these screws may be Torx 25 or 30 depending on the model. In any case, I never exceed 8 Nm of torque here, since the housing is quite delicate and it's better to avoid cracking it. Next, I install the air duct by placing its end directly onto the mass airflow sensor flange, and I tighten both screws with a T25 Torx bit, first gently and then with a torque wrench set to no more than 5 Newton meters. I now cover the air filter to make sure it won't get dirty during the remaining work, then put the housing in place, secure it, and install the last air duct. Once it is correctly positioned, I fasten it with a single screw, again using the same Torx bit and tightening it to no more than 5 Newton meters. Moving toward the final steps, I install the front panel, making sure not to pinch the hood release cables, as that could lead to a very unpleasant situation requiring aggressive emergency opening of the hood, which nobody wants. Finally, I tighten all the screws evenly using a Torx size 30 socket. Attention, attention! All components essential for the engine are now back in place, and it's time for the big moment, the first startup after the repair. I'm really curious to see if everything works, because this was a major operation. We replaced many parts and disassembled half of the engine. But there's no other option. It has to run, and that's exactly what I'm counting on. I now step inside, insert the key, but here's a very important detail. I only turn it halfway to activate the electronics without engaging the starter. Why do I do this? Because in this way, I can bleed the fuel system of the excess air that got in during the disassembly of the high-pressure lines. When the key is turned halfway, the pre-supply fuel pump is activated, which helps partially remove the air from the system. After the pressure in the lines has built up, I go to the front of the car and carefully check for any fuel leaks around the lines and all other connections we may have disturbed. It looks like everything is fine under the hood, so I get back behind the wheel and repeat the procedure 2 more times. 3 cycles in total to remove as much air from the system as possible, which could otherwise prevent the engine from starting. Now it's time for the real test. I sit in the car, turn the key, and try to start it. The starter turns, and turns, but unfortunately, it ends in failure. The car didn't start on the first attempt. I immediately check under the hood again to make sure everything is in order. No fluids leaking, no smoke, no strange smells. Then I return inside and try again. Ignition on, a short pause, and then I crank the engine. The starter spins, but the sounds from under the hood become worse and worse until finally the starter shuts itself off. Honestly, at this moment, I felt a bit disappointed. I was hoping to show in this video that the car fired up instantly, within a second, without any issues. But that disappointment didn't last long, because I quickly decided to figure out what had gone wrong and why my BMW wouldn't start. I started analysing possible causes. Could it be an air leak somewhere in the intake system? But in a situation like this, if it were only a leaky intake, the engine would still start. It just wouldn't run smoothly, so I thought maybe one of the injector connectors hadn't clicked in all the way. I checked them one by one, but each plug was seated correctly. The only other idea that came to mind was that maybe I had installed glow plugs with the wrong voltage, something like 12 volts instead of 5 volts. But after double checking, it turned out they were exactly the same type as the old ones, so that wasn't the problem either. And then it hit me. The car had been sitting on a dealership lot for nearly half a year. During that time, I kept opening the doors, switching on the lights, and with the extra strain from air in the fuel system, there was no way the battery could handle all that without recharging. That had to be the issue. So I disconnected both battery terminals, since you should never charge it while the wiring is still connected, and hooked it up to a charger. I'll record a separate episode just about proper battery charging because it's something you really need to know to avoid accidentally damaging the energy management module. When the indicator showed that the battery was fully charged, I disconnected the charger and once again sat behind the wheel to turn the ignition on, allowing the pre-supply pump to build up fuel pressure. Just to make things a bit easier, I disconnected the throttle body pipe and used an old mechanic's trick that never fails in situations like this. I sprayed a little bit of starting fluid directly into the intake. If you ever try this at home, be careful not to overdo it. This stuff is extremely flammable, and too much of it during ignition could seriously damage your engine. I got back inside, turned the key, and success! My ears finally heard the wonderful sound of the 3-litre diesel roaring back to life, working exactly the way I wanted. I double-checked that there were no leaks, no unusual noises, and that no exhaust fumes were escaping from the newly installed exhaust manifold. Once everything was confirmed to be in order, I could finally move on to reassembling the rest of the plastic covers. The whole car has been reassembled, and it's now ready to be used with confidence. At the very beginning, treat it gently and keep an eye on everything to make sure it's running properly. Only after driving a few dozen kilometers, once you're certain nothing is making noise and all components are working as they should, can you push it a little harder. At this point, I invite you to leave a like and check out the next episode of the rebuild, where we'll change all the fluids in this car ourselves, saving hundreds of dollars in mechanic fees. At the end of the project, here's a quick summary of all the costs. The replacement exhaust manifold with gaskets, studs and nuts cost me $65. The valve cover gasket was another $25. The complete set of 2 types of injector seals came to $13, and the vacuum hose was $10. The new glow plugs cost $65. The throttle body and EGR valve gaskets together were $6, and the new air filter was $20. The oil separator added another $10, plus a potential cost of $25 for the intake manifold seals and swirl flap delete kit. Altogether, that brings the total to $239. Not bad at all for such a huge transformation of this engine, right? I hope you enjoyed this concept.